Hello, this is Brendan from Install from Heap. I just wanted to let you know that I recorded this episode before the holidays, and I didn't get around to editing it. So if something seems a little out of time, that's why.
Welcome to Install from Heap, Episode 18, a Netrunner podcast from Rattlebox Games about jank, deck building, and cyberpunk nonsense. I'm Brendan Riley. Today on Install from Heap, in the Information Overload, we're going to talk about the Warren Ellis comic TRANSMETROPOLITAN. In Casting Call, we're going to explore who Laramy Fisk really is. In the Hactivist meeting, we're going to talk about holiday decks again, as well as see the first of our single core set, single data pack decks. And finally, in Exploratory Romp, we're going to think about all kinds of New Year's investments. Stick around. Hello Netrunners, welcome back to Install from Heap. I did manage to find a little time to record this episode. It might be a bit rough compared to other episodes that I release. I'm probably not going to have time to edit it as carefully, so I will try to avoid going as much as I can, because then I don't have to cut that out. A little news before we begin. I have a correction from last week, thanks to Dane Stevens for pointing this out. When I was talking about Punitive Counter-Strike, I mentioned Demolition Run as being a card you could use to trash an agenda rather than collecting it. And Dane reminded me that Demolition Run is only available to be used against HQ and R&D. So unless your opponent is holding a single card that you're pretty sure is an agenda, that's not going to work quite as well as I suggested. But you could still use it if you had, say, an open R&D and you wanted to run it, or somehow you knew there was an agenda there. You could use it that way. It's just trickier than I implied. On the Netrunner website from Fantasy Flight, they've announced that Data Pack 4 of the Katara cycle has been sneak peeked a little bit. Peeked? We've sneaked a peek at the fourth data pack of the Katara cycle. Looks like some spicy stuff. There's a couple Wayland things there that got me all excited, including a new Wayland ID that looks particularly tasty, and a new runner called 419, which is a play on the old Nigerian prince scam. So be sure to check that out. Finally, I want to take a moment to say happy holidays from your friends at Rattlebox Games. We have a couple projects coming up in the spring I'm sure you'll be excited to hear about, although if Netrunner is the only game you play, you'll just have to put up with me talking about those a little bit. But we've been playtesting quite a bit, and we've got some fun things on the way. So 2018 ought to be a fun one from Rattlebox Games. All right, on to Netrunner. Information Overload. Today is our second of the Information Overload segments. In the first one, about a month ago, episode 16, we talked about Zoo City from Lauren Bukes, which is a novel about a city in South Africa where everybody who has committed murder has a animal companion. You can go listen to the episode if you want to know. But I mentioned that this week we would be talking about the first volume of TRANSMETROPOLITAN, the Warren Ellis comic from 1997, which ran through 2002, illustrated by Derek Robertson, though they conceived it together. TRANSMETROPOLITAN is an homage to Hunter S. Thompson. So here's a clip from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas to help give you an idea of what Thompson is supposed to be like.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold. I remember saying something like,
I feel a bit lightheaded. Maybe you should drive.
Suddenly, there was a terrible roar all around us, and the sky was full of what looked like huge bats, all swooping and screeching and diving around the car. And a voice was screaming, Holy Jesus, what are these goddamn animals?
Hoot! 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 Pigs!
Say something!
Never mind. It's your turn to drive.
No point mentioning these bats, I thought.
It's a science fiction tale that takes place in the 23rd century, although they aren't clear about what year exactly. And the main character is a guy named Spider Jerusalem, who is basically Hunter S. Thompson in the future. He's mean to people, he's rude, he is a hedonist, but he also has a significant level of empathy for the downtrodden. And that's part of what makes him great, is that while he values his guns and kicking people when they are nasty, he also cares for the sick and wants to see the powerful brought low and the weak elevated. So he's a good character. He's really enjoyable to love and easy to empathize with in the future that they've drawn for him. TRANSMETROPOLITAN has a kind of dystopian feel that is common to cyberpunk. It feels like the technology is all around us, but it hasn't made us any better. The city is crowded. Robertson's art style is particularly dense in this book. There's not a lot of room for any empty space at all. Everything has lines or ads or both on it. And you can see how it would be overwhelming. Spider Jerusalem begins the novel living an isolated life on a mountain, looking very much like Alan Moore. And then he comes to the city and shaves all the hair off his body and proceeds to kick butt around the city. The Wikipedia entry for Transmetropolitan also describes it as a transhumanist graphic novel. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but the movement of transhumanism is the idea that with the acceleration of technology, if we make it widely available to everybody, we can move human beings forward. I think that may be true, that generally technology is the evolutionary advantage human beings have over other creatures on the planet. We figured out ways to make tools that extend our bodies beyond our meat bodies, and that is helpful to us. I think, like a lot of cyberpunk, though, Transmetropolitan doesn't necessarily understand all of that technology to be good. I would say the one thing it seems to really like there are anti-cancer pills you can take so that you can smoke and also not get cancer. One particularly striking thing about the graphic novel is its 20th century love for writing and the role writing can have in modern culture. In the novel, Jerusalem is a sort of famous journalist who has disappeared for 5 years, but now that he's back, he immediately, in the first book, does an exciting discussion of the police beating up some rioters in the center of the city, people who have adopted kind of extreme body modification. His writing is broadcast all over the city, and he becomes a kind of hero and becomes very wealthy at the same time. While it already felt a little quaint to have a writer have this kind of power in the late 20th century, by the time we're almost 2 decades into the 21st century, it feels really weird because while writing is important and we still see significant issues about the way that writing changes what's going on around us, it's harder and harder to see the idea of people getting kind of crazy excited about what a writer is doing on a kind of broad level. In that way, the graphic novel fits the idea of cyberpunk that we've been discussing on the Install from Heap thread. So I'm just going to mention this once, and after that you can know what I'm talking about. If you haven't joined us over on the website stimhack.com, I encourage you to go over there. There's a forum, and on the forum we have a thread called Install from Heap, where we have a discussion going on about the show. That's where people are posting their ideas for the Hactivist meeting conversation, and it's where we're talking about these cyberpunk books. So I bring that up because you can go there and read quite a remarkable post from our contributor Nutritional Zero, that's all one word, who poses a description of what cyberpunk is and then asks a question. They describe cyberpunk as a science fiction genre that can't imagine a future from a time before we've reached the end of history. Now, the end of history is a theoretical term used in modern scholarship from the humanities that I won't endeavor to explain here. You're welcome to go look it up a bit. But the idea is that cyberpunk has trouble imagining a future, but it is in a time before we had given up. I think Transmetropolitan is a good example of that. In the comic, journalism still matters. Poverty and corruption are worse than ever, and degradation of the human beings is part and parcel to the wealth of others. Happiness is hedonism alone, it seems, that small bits of happiness emerge in the fight for justice, and there's not a lot of good or positivity there. At one point, Nutritional Zero describes it as a mourning of the past, or a mourning of the future. So the question that Nutritional Zero asks is, why is cyberpunk still appealing? Because cyberpunk imagined a future that was about to change. It was sort of on the verge of change, and the potential for technology to make us better was still there, I think. But we live in a cyberpunk future now. It's hard not to look at old cyberpunk stories and see ourselves in them already. I mean, sure, not all of the devices in our house talk to us, but a lot of them can. And while many of the stories get things wrong about the way we engage with the internet exists in a way that few stories could have imagined. So if we aren't able to imagine the future, why, or if cyberpunk isn't able to imagine the future, why do we keep reading it? I'm keen to hear your thoughts. I'm inclined to think that modern culture, particularly right now, feels a little worse every day. That while we do have these technological marvels, more and more of us don't have access to them or have to choose between a secure future for ourselves and our children and access to the latest gizmos. And that feels particularly hopeless in certain ways. And we see this building accumulation of wealth that doesn't benefit a lot of us. So it's hard to see the transhumanist goals in something like Transmetropolitan particularly when it imagines that 100 years from now or 150 years from now, things will be worse and not better, which it's hard not to think of this graphic novel as being worse and not better. So I'm interested to hear what you think. I also would like to call for a discussion of what's next. I have a couple novels I'd like to read, but I feel like this is the end of the calendar year, and I'd be interested to know what you'd suggest as well. It would be fun to put a few novels on there that I've read already and feel excited about, but also people who are participating in the conversation are welcome to recommend some, and perhaps we can, as a group, vote, or if there's only a few recommendations, I'll just take the recommendations and choose what happens. I'm keen to have a cyberpunk reading club here on Install from Heap, and if you're interested in joining us, pop in and post a suggestion of something you'd like to read or something you've read before that you think would make for a good discussion. I look forward to seeing what you think. I'd also like to hear what you thought of TRANSMETROPOLITAN. Does it feel dated to you? Is what I'm saying about journalism fit? Or do we still have the potential for this kind of excitement? You know, right as I'm saying this, we're making all these nostalgic movies about the role of journalism. You know, Hollywood is releasing The Post this year, right? And we've had a number of movies about Snowden, and we have, and famously, of course, we have All the King's Horses.
Clearly, I meant to say All the President's Men.
About the Watergate scandal. These are films which we have always used to talk about journalism as a heroic endeavor. And despite the fact that our culture seems to have crossed that bridge in a scary way, I feel like there's still potential there. So I'm curious, what do you think of TRANSMETROPOLITAN, the future of journalism, life, the universe, and everything? Let me know. Casting call. I thought today, given that we're going into the holiday season, and like I mentioned last time, it's a time when people give gifts to one another, that I thought we would use our casting call today to talk about the character of Laramy Fisk, a savvy investor. Now, the character looks a little bit like a reject from Dragon Ball Z. He's got big, fluffy, orange, pointy hair and a soul patch, as well as some sort of blue sunglasses, and he's wearing what looks like an anime action figure outfit. It doesn't really make him look like a businessman, but he's called a savvy investor, and his power is that he can force the corp to draw a card every time he makes a successful run on a server, or the first time he makes a successful run on a server each turn. So he's constantly making the corporation draw a card, and hopefully then become flooded, right? That would be the idea, is to overwhelm the flooding. So Fisk is a much more interesting character than he was before in the Jackson Howard era, because Jackson just made it much easier for the corp to clear the cards they're getting flooded with, whereas Laramy Fisk is forcing that flooding to occur. But I wanted to think about what is this character invoking? What are we supposed to remember from this? And even though he's not really about investment, this is the figure I think of. Here's a character from the movie Magnolia. He's a pickup artist. Apologies for the language.
Welcome back from the break. How'd you guys like those nachos? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, you are not here for the food. You are here for me to enlighten you, to edify you, to send you off into the now not so unknown future. So come along with me. How to fake like you are nice and caring.
So that's the kind of thing I think of when I think of a savvy investor, somebody who does investments. Somebody who's on stage promoting exciting opportunities and challenging people to live their fullest and be true to themselves, and so on and so on. And it's not hard to do that with the character of Laramy Fisk in Netrunner, because one of the cards that he has is the Fisk Investment Seminar. In Fisk Investment Seminar, the art shows Laramy Fisk in a much more commercial setting. He's wearing a suit and tie, and he's drinking with what looks like a really cheesy businessman. And the flavor text, well, first off, it says each player draws 3 cards, play only as your first click. And the flavor text says, the secret to investing is networking. Laramy Fisk. So in this context, Fisk is causing both sides to draw cards. So again, if your strategy with this deck is to force the corporation to draw cards with the idea of flooding them and making them lose through being overwhelmed with their own resources, this would be the idea. It hasn't been proven to be a good thing, because usually, from a game perspective, the cards in your deck are cards you want, and so being forced to draw them just means that you get more of the cards you wanted. It hasn't proven itself to be a very effective strategy. But I wanted to think about, what is this figure that they're invoking, and who are we imagining? So in the history of self-help or promotional work, you have to remember How to Win Friends and Influence People, a book by Dale Carnegie, which was based on his self-help seminars that were started off early in the 1900s. And they're books about sort of making yourself better, right? They buy into this American idea of pulling oneself up by one's bootstraps, the idea that you are responsible, you are the arbiter of your own success. And while this is certainly true, it also trades on the myth that, or it also operates under the idea that if you don't succeed, it's because you didn't try hard enough. And there's some danger there, I think. Nonetheless, it's an extremely popular book. It's still in print. You can still go buy How to Win Friends and Influence People. Another well-known one is Norman Vincent Peale's The Power of Positive Thinking, which is another book that uses sort of pop psychology to imagine the idea that if you talk positively to yourself all the time, that you will do better, that it will make you better at what you're doing, and it will make you a positive person, and people will like you or whatever. This is a continual thing that we have in our culture, this idea if you think positively, good things will happen, right? Most recently, or in the last 10 years or so, The Secret is a book all about sort of using positive thinking to make yourself stronger and more powerful. These are, of course, books or training courses, but then you think about something where you go and you listen to a charismatic person, and you can't help but think about Tony Robbins. Anthony Robbins is an investor and an entrepreneur, but mostly he's known for giving promotional talks, helping people think strongly about themselves, and he's made an active life out of that. According to his Wikipedia page, he also gives away a lot of money, so he's good at making people like him in all sorts of different ways. He's sort of most famous as this self-help guru, somebody who will help you think positively about the world and help you attack it with gusto and do better for doing so. So while I'm thinking about these kinds of motivational books, and speeches, I'd also like to take a moment to plug the book, The Zen of Zombie. In January, I teach a course called Zombies in Popular Media at my school, Columbia College, Chicago, where we spend a month studying zombie films and reading stories and talking about the history of the zombie as a figure in horror culture. And we often are visited by author Scott Kennemore, a Chicago local who has written a number of zombie books. Most recently, Zombie in Chief, which is a sort of satire about a regrettable and horrifying person running for presidency and winning, despite the fact that he is a zombie. It's totally fictional and not at all connected to real events. One of Scott's first books was a book called The Zen of Zombie, which is a parody of a self-help book in which we learn to do better in life by embracing the way of the zombie, using the ideas that zombies use, the approaches they take to make yourself better. I highly encourage it if you can get it from your library or pick up a copy. It's quite a good read and very funny. So we have Laramy Fisk, and he's kind of a Tony Robbins, Frank Mackey type figure. He's offering advice to people doing investment. And it connected me to one more thing. So I did some searching and looking for items to talk about in this section, and I found an article that said, "Watch out for free lunch investment seminars." It's by Mark Henricks on the website The Street. And it talks about the idea that investment seminars are a kind of classic lure for people who are looking to be better in investment, but really what they are is a chance for the investment seminar runner not to educate you on being a good investor, but to sell you their investment products, and you will buy them, and then they will be richer and you will have less investments. It's sort of like the higher level version of those signs that say, "Make money at home by flipping houses." And there's just like a handwritten sign with a phone number. These seem to be like the higher level version of that. And so the article title, like I said, is "Watch Out for Free Lunch Investment Seminars." And the gist of the article is that if you go to one of these, the lunch might be free, but you are in fact, as the writer says, on the menu. And the idea is that they are going to take advantage of you. This is, of course, the model for the Fisk Investment Seminar, that he is literally eating lunch with an investor and they're clinking glasses of champagne, but they both get something out of the deal, right? They both get 3 cards. So from the runner's side, you play that when you know you want the 3 cards. And from the corp side, they get stuck with 3 cards that they maybe weren't ready to draw yet. And hopefully you can force them to discard them, or you can run with information sifting, a really strong card for a Fisk deck because you get to look at half of the cards in HQ. And the more cards are there, the more cards you get to access. Hactivist meeting. In my last episode, I made a call for decks that use a single core 2 and a single data pack to help our new players start to get rolling. Analog Brad was good enough to submit a deck. Actually, he submitted one for each side. He submitted a Chaos Theory deck, and he submitted a Wayland deck, which he called Kill Kill Score. I like that very much. It uses Jemison Astronautics, so it obviously uses the data pack that Jemison comes from, and sets up all kinds of great Jemison shenanigans. It's probably a little complicated if you're brand new to the game, but what better way to get into the solid world of jank than to dive into a Wayland Jemison deck. So go check out Analog Brad's deck, and if you are interested, I'd love to see more from those challenges. There may be more, in fact, before this episode comes out, but I am limited to the number I can see right now, so apologies to anyone else who posts them. I will comment again next time. The episode before that, episode 16, my challenge was holiday decks, and while we didn't have very many for last time, Anthony Pearson came through in a big way this time around. Anthony posted 2 holiday decks that are based around the idea of the movie Home Alone. And I think this is just genius, because Home Alone is already kind of an analog for Netrunner. On one hand, we have the wet bandits attempting to break in, and so Anthony uses a Ken Tenma deck that has all sorts of good cards, some of which are very thematically drawn from the movie, like, for instance, Push Your Luck, because Harry and Mav are dumb and bad, just like the card. Fall Guy, because they fall down a lot. And Tri-Math Contact, because they're criminals, and while they aren't high in the crime organization, they have made money in the past because of their robberies. Anthony also suggests a Corp deck. The Corp deck is Harishanda Entertainment, because Kevin is home alone and he's sort of watching himself. And this involves lots of good security stuff. So Anthony picks Ghost Branch and Snare and Salem's Hospitality because he knows what they're going to do when they're going to do it. It's excellent. I highly recommend that you check out Anthony's decks, and I'm hoping to get a chance to play them over the next week. So we're seeing lots of good development on both of the last 2 Hactivist challenges. I've got one more challenge for the next one, so we'll have kind of 3 in the works for next time. And this is called New Year's Jank. What I'd like to suggest for the next Hactivist meeting challenge is to build a deck focused around one card. So pick one card that's going to be the centerpiece of your deck that you're really going to aim to use in every game you play. It's probably a 3 of, that is going to rotate out next year. So let's assume that they're able to get 2 full cycles out next year. It's possible, although frankly not likely. But if they do, that means we'll likely have more rotation by the end of 2018. If they do, we're going to have some cards we won't get to play again. So I'd love to challenge you to see what kinds of decks we're going to play with. If 2018 is the last year for the lunar and sand cycles, what are some decks we could play that will otherwise be gone? A good question. Exploratory Romp. I'd like to talk about 2 cards today that seem relevant to our work. This is High Risk Investment and Long-Term Investment. These are 2 cards, both have investment on them, which is why I picked them for today. One is a Wayland agenda from Order in Chaos. High Risk Investment is a 3-point agenda that takes 5 advancement counters to score. It's an expansion agenda. It says, place 1 agenda counter on High Risk Investment when you score it. Click and use a hosted agenda counter. Gain 1 credit for each credit in the runner's credit pool. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. So basically, High Risk Investment becomes a punitive engine. If you're able to score it, you are able to use a click to double the runner's money, which can be really powerful on a turn where you're trying to land a double punitive. If you're already a little bit ahead and you can use High Risk Investment to double your money, that's great. Used in Titan, where you would get an extra advancement on top of it, it's pretty effective as well. The art shows a guy in a skyrise or high-rise looking at some sort of computer screen with a pie chart on it and a house of cards next to it. The house of cards, of course, implying the risk that he's taking. He's also got his arms back behind his head, and he's leaning back with a smile, sort of in the classic cocky businessman pose, showing that he is fully confident about the value of his high-risk investment. And of course, the quote is, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." This actually seems really solid around. It actually is a high-risk investment because it's a 3-point agenda. And anytime you put 3 pointers in your deck, you're taking a risk. You're also taking a risk because you may not get anything out of it. If your runner is running a poverty deck, you're not going to get much at all for this card. On the other hand, if you're running a punitive Counter-Strike deck, this could be really valuable. I could see this being effective in a Builder of Nations deck where you have 3 cleaners and say 3 high-risk investments, and then maybe a 2-pointer, because all of those become good fodder for punitive Counter-Strike. And if you manage to score it, then you get an extra agenda counter. Also, like I said, really good in Titan, where you could get a second agenda counter on it, allowing you to really use a couple clicks and launch your money into the sky. That said, I don't think this has ever seen much play, so it's not really as good as we would hope. Compared to some of the new agendas that are coming out that are self-protecting, this isn't really that great. The other investment card I wanted to talk about today is long-term investment. This is a card out of Terminal Directive. I have never seen anyone play this, but it's a neutral asset. It says it costs 2 to res. It says when your turn begins, place 2 credits on long-term investment. If there are at least 8 credits on long-term investment, it gains click, take any number of credits from long-term investment. So this is a siphon battery, right? It's meant to hide your money from account siphon, which isn't really an issue anymore. Although, who knows what cards will come out in Katara that may bring it back into value. I mean, the main challenge of this, right, is you have to have it in play 3 turns before you get to play it. Say you get it installed, you res it just before your turn begins, so you get 2 credits on your first turn. Then you need to have 3 more turns start before you've got the 8 on there that you can get off. And really, you only paid 2 for it, and you're getting 4 back. And the payoff over those 3 turns is double the payoff of like a pad campaign over that time. So from that perspective, it's good, but it also becomes a very attractive nuisance for the runner. I could see this valuable, though, in a Glacier build where you're building up a server and you want something in there. But I would think for the money, an Adonis campaign is just going to be a better return on investment. Just because you're getting the money out right away rather than having to wait that whole time and use up a server. The art, it's some sort of weird building. It's not clear what it is, but it's really hard to see it as all that great. It's kind of, hey, we just need a picture of a building site. And I guess the long-term investment is that you're building it up and then it'll be worth money. The art's not that exciting. It actually might be a whole city, though, now that I'm looking at it, or it's a very, very big place. Which, again, then maybe would be the investment. Like a lot of neutral economy cards, it has very little flavor. And it's also very little exciting. It's not very exciting. So I would not recommend long-term investment. I may try to play with high-risk investment, though. Au revoir. Well, that wraps up Install from Heap, episode 18. If you have suggestions for future topics or comments on the show, I'd love to hear them. You can send email to brendan@rattleboxgames.com or tweet to rattleboxgames. You can also visit our website, rattleboxgames.com, to subscribe to our newsletter, or follow the link to our forums on boardgamegeek.com, where my username is Wombat929. I'd always enjoy losing a game of Netrunner to you on Jinteki.net, where my username is also Wombat929. See you next time, but until then, remember, when all your best cards end up in the trash, you can always install from Heap. Today's media clips were from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Magnolia. Thanks for listening. Hold on. Hello?
Can you pick us up at the library?
Sure. I'll be there in about 10 minutes. So in my last episode, I made a call for... Will you lay down, dog? Pause for the dog to walk by.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.